Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Sargent. Welcome to my course, 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. We're coming to you today from Sacred Fire Church in Bellevue, Florida. Come on by. Welcome to 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. Today we are finishing up a two-part series with a lesson called A Lot Worse Than Lot. Last week we talked about Lot's supposed offer of his daughters to a crowd of homosexual rapists looking for victims, and we concluded that the offer is not genuine. The offer is part of a cultural paradigm of indirect communication, that the offer is meant to shame them, the offer is meant as a condemnation of them, and it is not actually legitimate. And we pointed out all the details in the story that point seriously toward in that direction. But what we can't miss is in our passage today, Judges 19, where we're looking at concubines, hospitality rights, and the betrayal in Judges 19. There's not a lot of redemption to be had here, but I will attempt to redeem one character, and I think it's important for how we approach this character, and that is the husband of the concubine. I think it's going to be important for how we perceive the way the story is meant to play theologically in the context of the book of Judges. So let's take a look at it. All right, so the story of Judges 19, some people call it the Levite and his concubine. It's a horror show. It's one of the worst stories. And in a book of horror stories, this is the most horrific of the horror stories. I can't imagine anything worse than this. And the fallout after the story, the events that this story leads to, are equally as horrific. You think you've reached a new low, and humans prove to you that they can go lower still, right? So there's nothing I'm going to say here today that's going to make this story less horrific. It's nothing coming out of this like, but really, it was a beautiful moment. No, that's not happening. It's not going to happen for us today. All right, but at the same time, there are some elements of the story that are often misunderstood. I think modern readers do not know how to make sense of all the details. We're going to struggle with a grammar issue, and that has to do with the identification of who exactly was it that threw this concubine to the ravening crowds. Who threw her out the door? Oh. And because of the way it's translated in English, and the English rules of pronoun use, English readers assume one thing, and I think they're wrong to assume it. All right, so what went wrong? We got a whole bunch of ones on this one. Modern readers misunderstand what a concubine is. We're going to unpack that. A concubine is not a sex slave, not in Israel. Whatever the word is that they use, and we'll look at what that word is, that we have decided to translate concubine, and however other words in Japan and China and other countries where we have those words that we also choose to translate as concubine and thus put them all together in our heads, I think we make a mistake. In Israel, a concubine is not a sex slave. A concubine is a type of wife. There's no such thing in the English world, in the Western world, as a type of wife. The only things that we have for types of wives are fiancé, wife, and ex-wife. Well, they have more categories than that, so we're going to look at that. 2, modern readers do not understand the importance of hospitality rights. I think last time we were together, we really unpacked the hospitality rights. I'm not going to go through all of that today. If you have not watched the previous episode, Take My Daughters, Please, then you want to go back and watch that because we're going to detail hospitality rights. I will hit on the importance of them here, but very quickly because there's no sense wasting time unpacking that. 3, modern readers do not fully grasp the connection between the story of Lot and Judges 19. It is essential to put these two stories side by side and recognize that the writer of the book of Judges has the story of Lot in front of him and is intentionally playing off of it. So it's a story written by a writer who's got another story in his mind that he is intentionally building a paradigm with. And so one of the things we're going to look at is that the similarities tell you to compare them, the differences are where the message is. So the story of Lot is the context for understanding the depravity of Judges 19, because the story of Lot is pretty depraved. Lot's not depraved, though we often accredit him as being depraved, but the entire situation is depraved. In this situation, this is why I call it a lot worse than Lot. What was a horrible situation in Genesis 19 is an even more horrible situation in Judges 19. It's almost, you've got Israelites naming the name of Yahweh who are worse than the Sodomites.
Oh my.
4, modern readers are largely unaware of the city and home designs of the biblical world. In other words, this story is taking place in a setting. And if you can't get your head around that setting, the details do not make sense. First time I went to Israel, when I say first time I went to Israel, it's as if I went twice. No. When I was in Israel, and you go to the place where David and Goliath happened, you stand there and go, mountain over there, valley there, hill there, river over there. Oh, this is why they did that, and this is what they meant by this, and this is how this is supposed to come out. I get it, because you have a setting for the story. What was before trying to create an imagination in your head, but because it was written for people that knew the territory, and you're reading it as a person who does not know the territory, you're a little lost. But when you see it, you're like, the same thing's going to happen in this story. The story makes more sense when we understand the structure of houses in these cities, in this place. Okay, they don't change very much over time. So modern readers are often led astray by antecedent in the story. Antecedent means that how you track the pronouns. To whom does the pronoun reference? 6, modern readers often fail to read the story within the context of Judges as a whole. This is a horror story in a book of horror stories. And the point of the story is the depths of depravity that one reaches when they have forsaken a belief in Yahweh. The pagan world was ugly. And when you rip out the restraint on the human soul, there is almost no limit to what human beings will do in their depravity. Right? A lot of times in today's world, we're like, don't listen to anybody. Listen to your own heart. Your own heart will speak to you. Your own heart will guide you. Don't let anybody else out there tell you who you are. You look inside and you get to decide who you are. Yeah, the only problem is that when you rip open your soul, the only thing that's coming out are the 7 deadly sins run amok. Truth is outside of us. The path of life is outside of us. There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is death. And so the only thing that we can do is to curb ourselves, bend ourselves, submit ourselves to the way of God and find the path of life that he's given us. All right. Number 7, the brevity of the story at certain points leaves the modern reader feeling cold. Passion and pain seem to us to be less developed than we wish. In other words, so you're reading this story that is so matter of fact in the telling of something so horrific, leaves you cold. I should be. There's a book that I'm getting ready to start reading called We Were in Auschwitz. And the writers who wrote it were among the prisoners in Auschwitz who were considered the strong. They call themselves the strong. They were determined to survive no matter who they had to kill. They were determined to survive no matter who they had to throw under the bus. There's going to be a conversation where one of them has, a train is coming in tomorrow. I've been told that some of my friends are on it. I have been assigned to lead them to their death. Should I tell them what's going to happen to them? Oh, he never says, should I try and help them escape? Should I try and save them? What should I? No. He's like, yeah, how do I lead them to their death without them getting upset with me? And he's very horrific in his telling. So he's telling about some of the most horrible things, but he has no feeling for the people around him. It's one of the features of the book. It's like something broke in him, and he has no care or concern. Describes things more horrible than you can imagine, like he's telling you he went and got milk from the grocery store. Story can have that kind of feel for us. It's like, and so if you have modern prejudices against the ancient people, we're caring and feeling people, but those ancients, they were heartless beasts. They were terrible people. They didn't love their children. They couldn't care less. Now, there are, like we said last week, there are cultures that are like that. There are places where, when the heart is unrestrained, that things are not the way they should be. A parent should love their child. A mother should love their child. And some situations can happen that break that bond. But that bond is as real then as it is now. So we didn't invent loving our kids. It's kind of been there for a lot of years. And so we want to be very careful because the story seems so matter of fact, that we don't use our own prejudices against past peoples to misunderstand the story. So that's why there's so many of these why did things go wrong. So let's go ahead and read it. Judges 19, starting in verse 1. In those days when there was no king in Israel. A very important opening. What does this tell you? 3 times in the book of Judges you're going to read this line. In those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. In those days when there was no king in Israel. This is an explanation for a breakdown in social structure. Everybody's just doing whatever they want. Now, during those days, when there was no governance, it was the wild, wild, wild west, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and nobody held anybody accountable, except in the most animal, barbaric ways. Well, there was a certain Levite. He was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim. He took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Again, a concubine is not a sex slave. Concubine is a type of wife, and we'll have to look at what does type of wife mean.
Did the concubine have could she go or not go? Did she have the freedom to say, no, I'm not going to go with you?
Well, we'll cut to the chase here. A concubine is a wife without inheritance rights. In other words, you come from a poor family, you have nothing to offer, you bring nothing but your body into the relationship, and if the relationship is severed, you leave with nothing but your body.
Okay, but she could say, no, I don't want to go with you. Or does she have
No. Yeah, it's like any marriage at that time, which is an arranged marriage. The freedom that an individual would have would be the freedom of a family, the way that a family, you've met some parents that have their kids under a spell. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in good ways and sometimes in bad ways. Sometimes it's just great admiration for mom and dad and love for them and trust for them. And you bend your will to their advice and their wisdom. Other times, I've met parents that were so oppressive and tyrannical to their kids that their kids sat shaking in school, desiring to do the most simple thing that their parents would not allow. Like their parents had announced to 2 girls I went to high school with that they were never going to allow them to marry. And they were like, I'm never going to get married. My parents told me they won't let us. And the rest would be like, you need to get out of there. Mm-hmm. Like, you really need to get out of there. That's sick that a parent would, because we need help we need people to do the work around here, and your mother doesn't like to do housework, so you girls are just going to have to stay with us forever. You can be free when we die. Oh, God. So you have that kind of psychological. So in the same situation, typically the way it's supposed to happen is that the mothers chibba, 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 and they set up a situation and then the fathers agree or disagree, and they bring the two together, and they meet as a family, and the would-be couple get to meet one another in a very monitored situation. And sometimes they know each other, and sometimes they don't know each other. Sometimes the entire situation was stimulated by the man or the woman through the mother. Hey, Mom, I want to get married, and I really like that girl. Sometimes it was just totally given to the parents to find the spouse. But ultimately, the child, to whatever degree they have a human will, says yes or no to the arrangement. If the parents are good and the mothers are good, the fathers are good, and the child is good, then it goes forward. Mm-hmm. But at any particular time, technically, according to the culture, the person is not forced into a marriage. But of course, we know that in a world full of psychologically oppressive people and psychologically damaged people, that sometimes it comes out a little different. But the fact that she's a concubine means there's a handful of situations. Either she is a concubine would be either an orphan who had no parents and thus no one to actually make a meaningful marriage contract, mm-hmm. or she was a captured slave because their people attacked or were direct and intentional enemies, and so they were taken as a slave. Now in Israel, you didn't get to have sex with your slaves. In other countries, maybe, but not in Israel. In Israel, one, you were not allowed to kidnap anybody, but a situation of war could be a little different. You came into my neighborhood, you attacked my house, I conquered you. I can't just let you go. But even in that situation, if you violate a slave girl sexually, she is to be set free or followed through with a promise of marriage, in which case she would become a concubine because she has no marriage contract. She has no specific inheritance right. She has no dowry, no marriage price. So it could be that your parents are just too poor to swing it. Maybe your parents themselves are servants, and so they swing something nice for their kid as best that they can do with what they do. And the situation is concubine, because you have no way to swing a good marriage. All marriages had contracts. Like, do you remember in the I don't know if you guys remember in the 1980s. I know you remember the 80s, but in the 1980s, it was a really big deal about prenuptial agreements and should Christians have prenuptial agreements. And everybody that gets married has a prenuptial agreement. If you don't write your own, you simply use the standard prenuptial agreement, which is the law of the land. So the government has written a prenuptial agreement. That's the law. If you want to do something extra, something different, if you're not content with what the prenuptial agreement of the law is, then you make your own. So here's the prenuptial agreement of the law. 50-50. She's 22, he's 89. He dies 2 seconds after saying I do, she gets it all.
Whole bag of suckers.
Right. Unless they have a prenuptial agreement. So the prenuptial agreement for divorce is 50-50. But in death, it's everything unless you have something different. So you're actually making a type of a prenuptial agreement in the case of death by having a will that says my wife gets 10%, my son gets 90%, and right. But that's like a prenuptial agreement in your will. So here's a prenuptial agreement in case I die. No one would fuss about a will. Here's a prenuptial agreement in case we, for one reason or another, break company and part ways. So I don't have a problem with having a prenuptial agreement because you already have one. You're just either satisfied or not satisfied with the one that the state has written for you. That's the way it was here. There are standard rules of behavior, unless the family making a marriage contract can swing something good or better or a little different. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him. It says, play the zana. Zana. Unfaithful to him, and she went away. The question is, did she commit adultery, and because she committed adultery, run away because she's afraid? Or was she unfaithful in the fact that she ran away? That is a little sketchy here. Is this a bad woman, an immoral woman, who, getting caught in her immorality, fled? Or is this a woman who, for one reason or another, was angry with her husband and simply went back to Papa? And thus played the zana by going back to her father.
Doesn't the King James says she played the whore? Yeah,
because they're working off this word zana. And zana means technically unfaithful, prostitute. You know, that's kind of what the word means. Frequently it's a spiritual condition in Israel for being unfaithful to the Lord. So the question would be, in what way was she unfaithful? It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, unless someone can come and show me, and if you can show me where, it's one of those things where you say, it always means, you're always in trouble when you say it always means. Like people often say in the creation story, that the word for creation, bara, means creation out of nothing. It does not. Flat out. It can mean that, but that's not, there's nothing intrinsic in the word that means creation out of nothing. As a matter of fact, if you look at it in context, it positively does not mean that in certain passages of Scripture. So we can often get an idea about a word and what its limitations are. So it means to be unfaithful. Frequently, maybe even almost always, in some spiritual sense or some sexual sense. The question here is going to be, is this sexual unfaithfulness that caused her to run? Or was it a marital unfaithfulness in the fact that she ran? Kind of hard to say. Matter of fact, one of my professors debates whether Hosea's wife, when he married her, was playing the prostitute, or whether, because the book is about the spiritual prostitution of the land, whether he is telling her to marry a woman who is unfaithful like the people are unfaithful, who then becomes, in other words, was she a prostitute, he married her, she goes back to prostitution, or was she a spiritually unfaithful person, a not a strong believer who, after he marries her, goes and runs around cheating on him. And so the professor is debating this playoff of zana, spiritual, versus zana, physical, sexual. I'm just saying, there's some questions here. All right. And she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah and was there 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. Oh, great, he's taking her away. One last mouth to feed. What an embarrassment to have my married daughter back here again. Oh, how the people are talking. He's going away. And he said all that while smiling. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there. And on the 4th day they arose early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go." So the two of them sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, "Be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." And when the man rose up to go, his father-in-law pressed him till he spent the night there again. And on the 5th day he arose early in the morning to depart, and the girl's father said, "Strengthen your heart, and wait until the day declines." So they ate, both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to them, "Behold, now the day is waned toward evening. Please spend the night. Behold, the day draws to its close. Lodge here, and let your heart be merry. And tomorrow you shall rise early in the morning for your journey and go home." But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. And he had with him a couple of saddle donkeys, and his concubine was with him. All right, now that entire scene is ridiculous. But is there something in it that is key to the story, key to the big picture of the period of the judges, of the days when men do what's right in their own eyes, when there is no king in Israel, no law, no answering to a higher authority other than the brute strength of your hand and whatever desires are driving it? It's something. We're going to come back to this because we have to compare it to the story of Lot and see where does that connect to the story of Lot. Is this just blather? These stories do not tend to be written verbosely. They are very concise. And when a very concise writer goes blah 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 blah, he's talking to you. He's telling you something in his blabby blab.
Okay, so this was before there were any kings. This was in Judges.
Yeah.
So why would it say and at this time there were no kings in Israel? There were no kings.
Because the book is written much later.
Oh, okay.
In the days when there were no kings in Israel.
Okay.
But once you get kingship in Israel, now you have different periods where the judges are reigning and the judges are doing well, but still it was less consistent. Right? So you got a king, and then his son it says the transition of power is usually power, 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 power. And the judges, it was power, wild world, power, wild world. Samuel comes in and he brings order, but they're looking for kings because they want a little consistency. Actually, might like to do that on put some of the kingship conversation as a. It shows up in my other class, Man Behind the Curtain, where we talk about the importance of kingship and the ideas about kingship and how it plays into the hopes of Israel, the failures of Israel, and all right. Behold, the day draws to its close. Lodge here and let your heart be merry. Tomorrow you shall rise early in the morning for your journey and go home. But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddle donkeys, and his concubine was with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was nearly over, and the servant said to the master, "Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." Remember, it's the Jebusites that David conquers in order to make Jerusalem his capital. And the day that he kills Goliath, he already has his eyes on Jebus. Already is setting his sights on that. In other words, even when he kills Goliath, he knows where God's calling him to, and he's making a plan. Because takes the head of Goliath, and he goes to Jabez with it. And he parades the head of Goliath around the city, telling them, yeah, you're next. There's other reasons, too. A replication of the path of Abraham, where Abraham goes from his great victory, and he goes to Jerusalem and pays a tithe. In this particular instance, David's tithe is the head of Goliath. Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it. And his master said to him, we will not turn aside into the city of foreigners, who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah. And he said to his young man, come and let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or Ramah. So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. Now, I am from the north, and when the sun goes down, it takes a very long time. The sun is down, but it's pretty light for quite a while after that. But I guess if you're in places that are much closer, and I've been there, and I just don't recall how fast it happened. I do recall how fast it rose when we sat over the Dead Sea and watched the sun rise. It went from pitch black to bing!
Sun's up.
Someone threw the switch, right? So what I understand is when the light goes out on you down here, it goes out. You're much closer to the equator. They're not totally in the equator, but still. So the closer you get to the equator, the less dawn and twilight you have, right? And they turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Very important. And I hope as we're reading this, I hope your head is going exactly like the story of Lot. Exactly like the story of Lot. Exactly like the story of Lot. Every point, every statement, the writer is intentionally connecting his story with the story of Lot, and that's going to be very important for us. And behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah. Now, what does that mean? He's in the hill country of Ephraim. What does that make him? Even though he's in Gibeah, where's he from? And who else is from Ephraim? The husband. This is, hey, you're from Norton. Yeah. How cool. I'm from Norton, Massachusetts. I run into somebody, you know Norton? I grew up in Taunton. Just happened, a girl that was working on my teeth. So she goes, well, where are you from? I said, Boston? She goes, oh, I'm from Boston too. I said, oh, so you know the area? Yeah. Well, I'm from Norton. She goes, well, I'm from Taunton.
Okay.
Which is funny because people from that area come anywhere else in the country and they say, where are you from? You go, Boston. I'm actually halfway between Boston and Providence. This is where I grew up. But you just say Boston. And so she's doing the same thing. I'm from Boston too. Then we find out we actually grew up just a couple miles from each other.
I'll be darned.
So that's what it's like. It's like, hey! And he was sojourning in Gibeah. The men of the place were Benjamites. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, where are you going? Where do you come from? And he said to him, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to the house of the Lord, but no one has taken me into his house. And we have straw and feed for our donkeys, and bread and wine for me and your female servant, and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything. And the old man said, peace to you. I will care for all your wants, only do not spend the night in the square. Now remember I said that when you put the story of Lot and this side by side, the comparisons draw the stories together. The distinctions are where the messaging is. There are hints in this story that something's not right. Something has gone awry. This isn't the way this is supposed to go. But you find that in the distinction. So even here, we're trying to get somebody to take us in their house. No one's taking us in. Look, we can take care of ourselves. We don't need anything from you.
Yeah, we get this.
Yeah, we got it. We got it all taken care of. I don't have to eat from your table.
Oh.
I just need a roof over my head. The story of Morgiana in the Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. And the thief who is pretending to be a friend who won't eat salt at Alibaba's table. Sure. Remember we talked about that. And she sits there and says, what kind of a man will not eat salt with his friend? She goes and peeks and realizes that he's an enemy. And so here's this, I don't want to be a burden on anybody. Maybe that's why nobody will take me in. I got everything I need. I don't need anybody to take care of me. I just need a roof over my head. I just need to be protected. The old man said, peace to you, and I will care for all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square. So he brought him into his house and gave the donkeys feed, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. And as they were making this big washing of the feet, remember this is a big deal because you wear Sandals or barefoot.
Mm-hmm.
You go around barefoot, you get sandals. Right. They ate and they drank, and they were making their hearts merry. What does that mean?
Getting drunk.
They're getting drunk.
Mm-hmm.
They've been like, hey,
I love
you're
you,
my
man.
best friend. I love you, man. You're so awesome. I know we just met, but we're going to be friends forever. Until 5 minutes from now when I punch you in the face because I suddenly think that you're trying to hurt me. All right. I actually watched two friends almost beat each other to death. One of them knocked three of his friends' teeth out.
Oh my
They
grief.
didn't even know who each other was. They were so drunk, but they banged into each other drunk. And the one goes, hey, you watch where you go, you watch where... I mean, they literally... And they just throwing fists and teeth are popping out and blood splattering everywhere. And these two guys are best friends. But they're so drunk they don't even know what's going on. As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. They said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Now, remember when we talked about the last story, this kind of thing like, yeah, I'll give up my daughters because who cares about them? They're just girls. And we said, yeah, that's not typical, right? That's not, we're taking this whole thing. But here, all of a sudden, this almost feels like so similar to Lot, but a little different. Something ain't quite right here. He says, let me bring them out now. Violate them. Do with them whatever seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. Now, everybody reads this, and they say, the husband walks up in a situation and shoves his own wife out. But is that what it actually says? Who are the antecedents? So the man, who's that man, seized his concubine. Well, does the man and the his have to be the same person? In English, we would expect them to be. Yes, but not in Hebrew. In Hebrew, you can have this shifting of pronouns unannounced.
So it could be the man that invited them in.
In other words,
he
is
grabs
this,
the
yeah,
concubine.
the man, so the man is either the host or the guest. By English rules of grammar, we assume it must be the one who owns the concubine. Because so the man seized his concubine. Well, it must be his own. Not so in Hebrew. I think we've told the story of David and Goliath, where David conquers Goliath, and he put his armor, his sword, in his tent. And where is it the next time we see it? It's in the tent of Yahweh. It would be a sacrilege for David to put the armor of a conquered foe into his own tent. When he says, and he put it in his tent,
Meaning
his
Should have been a
tent.
capital H.
The big capital H, his tent. And that's exactly where it should go, according to the rules of warfare, and that's exactly where we find it the next time we're looking for it. So in the same thing here, the Hebrews are more fluid with their pronouns. At times it's frustrating because you're like, we would never do that with our pronouns because we're decent grammarians. But these guys, they just, at this particular point, they've left it seemingly ambiguous. We're going to unpack it as we get later. And so the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. And her master rose up in the morning when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine laying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. Never think a detail is empty. Every detail matters. She's laying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. We're going to have to look at that threshold. It's going to matter. And he said to her, get up, let us be going. But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his house. And when he entered his house, I mean, is that not you know what I mean? Does that not sound cold?
That's
Yes.
very cold.
If he's the one who threw her out, then that is the coldest scene in the entire Bible.
Well, even if he wasn't the one who threw her out, she's laying there. She's been abused all night, and he says, "Get up and let's go."
But does he know?
Well, I mean,
We assume so because we assume our house structures, and we assume our behavioral pattern, right? We assume our sleeping arrangements. We assume our house structures. We assume a lot on this story. But so one of the things we're going to have to do is get our heads into the setting.
Okay.
Like it's like you almost want to build, what is it? What you guys ever go to school? You ever do what do you call them? Little panorama? What do you call them?
Diorama.
A diorama. That's the word. So we're gonna have to build a diorama, a mental diorama of the scene, and put all our characters in place to try and figure out what did he know and when did he know it. If he does not know, then this is one of the cruelest, sorrowful moments in the Bible. And if he does know, it's one of the coldest and most horrific scenes in the Bible. Imagine coming out and finding your wife, who you love enough to forgive for running away or for playing a whore and running away. And then if you're not the one who pushed her out, but someone else did, and you have no knowledge of this event, to suddenly discover her in this condition. So when he comes, see, we're trying to dance this in our head. We're trying to say, but how could he not know? You'll see how he could not know. And exactly where would the women sleep if there were guests in the house? How was the house structured? What were the behavioral patterns of going to bed at night? Where were the servants? Where were the animals? How is this whole scene laying out? And so we're going to build our little emotional diorama, and we're going to unpack to see what it is. All right. And when he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her, limb by limb, into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. Now, we have no context for that. There is nothing in our world that even comes close to what's happening there. What in the world would all these people do when they open up the morning mail and there's a foot in it?
Head in a box.
At the risk of referencing a terrible movie, is it Seven?
Yes.
Where
in the box?
What's in the box? What's in the box? Oh, come on! What's in the box? Tell me what's in the box.
You never saw that? This guy's wife's head. The murder.
Oh, horror scene!
Yeah,
one of the worst scenes in horror movie history,
yes,
right?
That was tense.
But this is he sent. What does that even mean? What is the context for this entire event? What on earth? Who in the world does this? Because what do we have? We call up the paramedics. We bring in the ambulance. They send them to the mortuary. So I'm going by one of the strip malls the other day, and I can see around the corner on the highway, over the trees, a terrifying billow of black smoke.
Oh.
And I'm on the phone with Melody, and I go, "Oh, Melody, there's a big fire here. I wonder if it's a car fire, if it's a." And then I realize, "Oh, it's coming from a strip mall. I think the strip mall's on fire." And as I drive by it, it's a mortuary.
Oh.
They're doing a cremation.
Soylent Green. It's
Yeah.
people.
Soylent Green is people.
Oh.
Up the chimney with people. But anyway, all right.
Must have been a fat one.
But it was like, really, I thought the whole building was coming down.
I bet they did too.
But we have a certain pattern of everything we do, and they have different patterns for what they do. They're people just like we're. They have the same basic passions, same basic desires. The rhythms of their lives are so radically different than ours. This is a scene where we don't even know what to do with it. What in the world is this? We're going to unpack that. All right, so first, we've already talked about it. A concubine is not a sex slave, unless you're using feminist definitions, in which case every married woman is considered a sex slave. What do they like to say? Marriage is the last legal slavery in the world, which is a ridiculous statement. But that's one of the arguments they were trying to make when they were trying to fight for no-fault divorce. You know how they always say that 50% of marriages end in divorce? All right, that has always been a lie. It's always been a lie. What happened is, in the year that they got no-fault divorce, all the people that had wanted to get divorced for years and were not allowed to get divorced because they had no good reason for getting divorced, rushed in and got divorced. So there was a massive flow of divorce the year that they legalized. Now, but you remember, the year that they legalized no-fault divorce, they're talking about people that have been married for any number of years, all of them coming together to rush in. And in that year, there were 50% of all the marriages, the divorces that year were 50%. That's what the number they started using. It's the dumbest number in the world. In a massive study that was done about 10 or 15 years ago, 28%, no, I'm sorry, 72% of people that were married were still married to the first person they'd ever been married to. It's very hard to get your pulse on a divorce statistics because marriage is ongoing. Some people have been married for a year, some have been married for 10 years, some have been married for 50 years. We know that divorce after 30 years the statistics are so low, it's almost zero. It's really that low. It's not zero, but it's so low, it's quintessentially doesn't happen. Rarely happens. So rarely happens, they don't even got a percent on it. So now you've got 28% of these people at this one time. It's like a single snapshot of a flowing river. At this particular time, 28% of the people were either widowed, divorced, or divorced and remarried. That meant that in that singular snapshot of 28%, that included both deaths and divorces. So the divorce rate was even lower. Now they are working toward making marriage an utter. They are working hard to fail. It's like this. This is how this works. I come up and I say, people can't swim. 50% of people that try to swim drown. And then you go out, and every time you find somebody swimming, you jump on their back and hold them underwater until they drown. And say, I told you 50% of the people that try to swim drown. So this is kind of what it is. They hate marriage. They want to destroy marriage. They will tell any lie to undermine it. They will they only want to tell stories that undermine it. They want to destroy the system. They want to wreck it. They want they don't want people to engage in it. They want people to break out of it. They want people to be unfaithful in it. They want people to be unfaithful before it. They want to do everything in their power to make people unfit for marriage. They want every single individual standing alone before the government, isolated, afraid, and dependent on being part of the collective for their survival.
That's why welfare encouraged single women.
Yep. They want to replace men with the government and the goodies that the government will give. I guess a recent statistic is 80% of people who file for divorce are women filing for divorce against their husbands for no reason other than, I'm just
tired of it.
I don't want this anymore. They just did a big thing that I saw where they were going around and here was the study. If you won $1 million in the lottery, would you divorce your spouse?
I saw that.
I think it was like 90-something% of men said no. Like 90% of women said yes. Tells you a little something about, but this is what they want. This is what they're trying to cultivate. Okay, so they want to, but concubines are not sex slaves. We're going to have to unpack what it means because remember, we have a number of countries in the world, and they all have different kinds of ways of putting relationships together. And they all have words for the different categories of those relationships in any given culture. And we have chosen to translate certain words in this country, certain words in that country, certain words in this country, all with the same English word. And yet that same English word is not necessarily a useful comparison. So one country might have sex slaves. Israel does not. Matter of fact, they have very specific rules and laws around the sexual abuse of women that are under your power, and how you are held accountable to respond to them. So we find the definition, a slave girl who belonged to a Hebrew family and bore children. You actually have this phrase in Bible dictionaries, the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia and the International Dictionary of the Bible. Both have phrases like this, a slave girl who belonged to a Hebrew family and bore children. That is not true, flat out. You say, well, am I going to argue with Bible dictionaries? Yes. Will I argue with a lexicon? Yes, I will argue with a lexicon. These are all conversations to be had in these particular statements. Matter of fact, it is very specific in biblical law and biblical practice, even from anything that we can evidence, that the minute you took a servant girl and breached the barrier between you and her sexually, you had to set her free or make her a wife. Right? So if you take a servant girl and you give her to your son because he likes her and wants to be with her, she's not a slave anymore. She's free. But she becomes a wife. And you say, well, did she have any power to you asked the question earlier, did she have the power to deny it? It is very unlikely that a person that is a servant girl that is given a chance to be to be made a wife in a family that's rich enough to have servant girls, that she's going to deny that. You got to provide for her. You got to take care of her. All right, let's go on. So the problem that we have with defining concubine, we don't have as many social categories in our culture We tap out with girlfriend, fiance, wife, mistress, ex-wife. But we don't have a lot of categories. There's no such thing as a type of wife or a kind of wife or a wife of this structure or a wife of that structure. It doesn't exist. And so we don't have. Remember how we talked about the Venn diagram that we drew when we talked about God, and that what our English word God means is very different than what their Hebrew word Eloah, and Elohim meant? Well, the same thing happens here. Our conceptions, or all the word spheres that we have that cover marital relationships, girlfriend, mistress, fiance, wife. Can you think of any others? Do we have any others that are male, female, romantic connection relationships? I can't.
Other than slang,
Yeah, you got slang, but
word.
words that actually define a different type of relationship. We have baby mama.
Yeah, I hate that word.
And baby mama is such a derogatory thing, but I guess it's a category.
Yeah.
What's the other one?
There's baby
Sister wives.
Yes.
But this is illegal.
Yeah.
To say sister wife is illegal, and to say baby mama is considered profoundly immoral, just like mistress is profoundly immoral. The whole category is disgusting. But we do recognize that we are verbally limited in our ability to get our heads around a certain word. So how am I going to translate that word into my language that doesn't... I don't have the mental categories for this, so I have to create a new mental category. I have to say, in this culture, their categories for male-female relationships are this, 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 this. They don't match ours. But here are the rules for this one. All right. So we don't have the same kinds of marriage contracts. Marriage contracts are standard for us. So we don't think about them unless one party... Look, you asked... the look of shock that you had on your face when I said every single person that gets married in this country has a prenuptial agreement. The look on your face was like, what? What are you talking about? What are you, an idiot?
Yeah, prenup?
I didn't have one.
Yeah.
I got married. I didn't have one. I got married and I didn't have one. Well, I did. It's standard.
Yeah.
Right. So you have these standard practices, and unless you do something special, standard practices apply. This is just the way of it. Right. So we don't think about it. We don't think of ourselves as having these kinds of prenuptial agreements, but we do. Usually a person makes a special prenuptial agreement when one party or the other has a particular quantity of wealth that needs or deserves protecting. So for instance, if you have children and your spouse dies and you remarry, you better get a prenup that protects the property of your dead spouse that should be going to your children and not getting swallowed up into the estate of your new husband. You need some very strong legal boundaries there so that your children get their due. This is my mother's china. Yeah, well, I like it. And my daddy married your mama, and so now it's my daddy's, and my daddy wants to give it to me.
Been there, yeah.
The diamond ring, the family photos, the house, the tricks and the twists that people play because people are amazingly greedy when someone passes away.
Turn into buzzards.
Oh, terrible. I've seen what appeared to be loving, wonderful families disintegrate into madness over some money.
Yep.
All right, so we recognize that. We have just got to get our head and say, okay, I am reading a story that exists in a completely different paradigm than I am accustomed to thinking about the world. Let's build some new categories in my head. Okay, I have to create a category that's, multiple. What happens in a polygamous situation? And what happens when wives have to, we're dealing with the world of bride price. We're dealing with the world of dowries, and well, how does a dowry work, and how is it different than a bride price? And I am actually there's a ranking of wives based on the status that they have because of the income they either come with in one form or another. Smoke out the ears. Well, that's what we're going to have to do here. We're going to have to say, okay, I'm going to set aside judgment for a moment to simply understand. Having no polygamy, we don't have rankings for wives. The closest we come to categories is a common law wife versus a married wife. That's not exactly a ranking, though, is it? Common law. So I said, do we have any more categories? We do, but it's common law wife. So it's not really a different ranking. It's still wife. It's just became a wife through a different path. This person became a wife because they went up an aisle. They said, I do, because they stood before a magistrate and said, I do. This person became a wife because she simply did.
We did.
for a certain amount of
See
time,
what you did there.
according to the law. Yeah, I made that off the cuff.
That was
They should pay me to do this.
Yeah.
All right. It's not ranked. So several concubines in Scripture begin as slaves, but concubine is a change in status. I was a slave, but now I'm a wife. What kind of wife? Concubine.
Would Abraham, Sarah, what was her name? Hagar?
Mm-hmm.
Would she have
Yes.
suddenly all of a sudden, boom, I'm a wife?
Yes.
Okay.
But
But
ranking is important, and we're
Okay.
going to talk about that because your status changes to wife, but it's a kind of wife. In order to maintain order in the home, there is ranking.
sure.
And when you get a little too,
Uppity?
especially in the Hammurabi Law Code, if you go from slave to wife and get a little too uppity with the chief wife, with first wife, primary wife, primary wife is legally allowed to put you in your place.
Ooh. Okay.
You can be stripped of just like your husband can divorce you, you can be stripped of your status,
Oh.
in which becomes a type of a divorce.
So would that person then go back to being a slave, or
Yes.
they're just free?
No.
Oh, right back to being a slave. Okay.
Under Hammurabi's law.
Mm-hmm.
Under Hammurabi's law. It's a very different thing. If your son has sex with the servant girl and then refuses to marry her, you set her free. But in Hammurabi's law code, which is the Assyrians, that whole area up there, it's a very different kind of thing. Remember, Abraham's coming out of where? That's where he's coming out of. That's his world. That's his culture. So with his whole thing with Hagar and with the other wives, Jacob is going to end up with 4 wives. 2 of them are no longer servants, but they are not first wives. They are now. Of course, what's going to happen when he marries 2 sisters, both of which have high ranking, both of which come with strong prenuptial agreements associated with them. Of course, they're furious. Remember, they're furious because that which was meant to be a bank account for their protection in case of a situation of divorce, that's what bride price and dowry stuff is. It's protection for the wife. There are all kinds of things. Like when we look at the woman caught in adultery, and we're going to do that one, it comes in where you can't touch a wife's dowry as a husband unless she dies.
The plot thickens.
The plot thickens. I could divorce her, but she's got quite a dowry. If I do that, I will lose her. What shall we do? It's a dangerous world out there. The roof is high. Honey, could you go up and get me something off the roof? In India, they just throw kerosene on them and burn them up and say, it was a total accident.
Yep.
So having no polygamy, we don't have rankings wise. The closest we come to is categories in common law, wife versus married wife. But this is not ranking. This is simply, in America, it's a different path to getting there. Some people will think badly of you, or they might think badly of you for how you got there, but they are not going to deny your status. Several concubines in Scripture began as slaves, but concubine is a change of status. We already did that one. Okay, number 5. The terms associated with concubine have a tendency to get mixed up between time, languages, and cultures. Each culture had different ways of dealing with polygamy, marriage, and concubines. All right, so each culture has a little bit of a different way of doing things, what your statuses were, what the rules were. And they're speaking Japanese, or they're speaking Chinese, or they're speaking Mandarin. I'm not Mandarin, that is Chinese, sorry. Or I meant to say Mongolian. They're Mongolian, and now they got a whole different language and a whole different structure. We have chosen to translate those words with the same English word. But that does not mean that just because you're using the same English word, you have the same categories and the same rules for those categories. So each had different ways of feeling about these legal and social relationship issues. We look at them and we're horrified, absolutely horrified at some of these situations, because that's not the way we do it. And I'm not saying that they were right and we were wrong, and I'm not saying that they're wrong and we're right. I'm saying that they had cultural ways of dealing with problems, solving difficulties, and we have a different way of solving difficulties. And are some better than others? Absolutely, some are better than others. Some lead to stronger marriages. Some lead to happier civilizations. Some lead to stronger cultures. The family is the substructure of society. As goes the family, so goes society. And so if you find a paradigm of marriage that makes for stronger marriages, stronger families, stronger societies, happier people, healthier people, then that is better than saying, well, and they just do it different. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's just different. Nonsense. Some cultures are better than others. And while everybody has a tendency to enjoy what is more comfortable, like I am used to it this way, that does not mean that some are not better. You know, that might be strange to me, but it also might be better. And you have to be ready, everybody has to be ready to examine another culture, another world, another way that they do things, and be willing to say, maybe they're onto something. Maybe they're not. What's the product? All right. So each culture had different ways of dealing with polygamy, marriage, and concubines. Each had different ways of feeling about these legal and social relationship issues. In the Bible, Mary was betrothed to Joseph. And you go, oh, betrothed, that means engaged. No. Betrothed is a whole different category than fiancé. When you have reached the stage of betrothal, you are already married. That's why he has to pursue a divorce. But we don't have two-stage marriages. We have married, not married. But they have different. Go on.
Didn't we used to, way back when they had circuit pastors that would marry people cyclically, so people would live together, hand fast, betrothed, whatever, until they could get married?
And be in a sexual relationship? I'd have to look at that. I mean, we always have the struggle when you're talking about marriage. Is marriage an institution of the state, or is it an institution of society? And how do you make a marriage when there's no courts or governments or record keeping? What is a legitimate and illegitimate way of handling it? We have to look at that. Israelites were accountable for their sex. They were accountable to take responsibility for their sex. This is not a free-for-all. If you read J.D. Unwin's Sex and Culture, I think we've already talked about this book, his basic conclusion is that no society gets off the ground without premarital chastity and marital fidelity. Every nation that has abandoned it, utterly and completely abandoned premarital chastity and then marital fidelity, crumbles to nothing in a certain amount of time. According to him, you don't make it 100 years as a thriving, successful culture. We are in corrosion mode. We are we are degenerating as a culture.
Oh, big time.
The ability of our children to reason and think is degenerating. They are becoming, because one of the things that he says is that when you have no boundaries around your sexuality, you become a feeling people, not a thinking people. And a feeling people are bored, resentful, and angry at thinking people.
Well, that sounds like social media today.
Yeah.
Shazam.
You can't talk about something without an emotional response rather than a thinking response. If you hear something that you don't think is true or you've never considered before, your reaction is rage, and you've shut your mind to it. So I'm reading a book right now, The Closing of the American Mind, written in 1987 by Alan Bloom, a true academic, a true intellectual. The book is phenomenal, but he wrote it in 1987. He saw today in 1987. In the book, Chance of the Dance, dumb title, great book. And it's not really a dumb title when you're done with the book. When you're done with the book, you go, he could call this book nothing else. There's no better title for this book. He saw today in 1969. Because he is a true intellectual. And they're unpacking this. And one of the things he's talking about, because he's in the Alan is in the universities, he'd been teaching since the mid-1950s. He's looking at how his students are changing year by year, seeing what's coming to him in the one of the best universities, seeing what's coming to him, how they think differently, react differently, how their entire orientation of the world is different, and he's simply cataloging the differences and the changes that he's witnessed over the decades. But it's one of the things he hits on. Feeling rather than thinking. They stop reading. They stop exposing themselves to ideas. They start fixating on music and other less intellectual pursuits. So sitting there watching TikTok videos so that your attention span is 3 seconds long. We are in degeneration because we have abandoned. Now, he says no one's ever made it 100 years. So the question is, when did we as a society completely abandon? Now, we can go back to the 1950s, and there was lots of immorality. There was immorality in the 20s and the 10s, and in the 1800s, there was always been immorality. Wherever you have people whose hearts are not submitted to God and who do not restrain themselves according to the Word of God, you have rampant immorality. But you can be very immoral and exist in a society that still holds out moral standards. If I get caught doing X, Y, Z, I will be shamed in the community. I will be hated and despised. When you reach a point where nobody is hated and despised, no matter how vile they are, you're already there. But when did that exactly happen? He says 100 years. So let's say 1965. He's saying by 2065, you're not even going to be able to recognize America.
I think it started going downhill after World War II.
Oh, you definitely had some radical changes on social paradigms after World War II. The women all went to work.
Feminism?
Oh, yeah. Well, because, yeah, the Marxists, there are people who get very upset. You can't go around saying critical Marxism all the time. Why do you keep saying Marxism? Why do you keep saying that? And I'm not kidding. I actually have people say that. Because if you have to understand. All right, so I hate when I start a sentence and then shift halfway in my brain and go in different directions. So, audience, please forgive me. I do that a lot because my brain is firing off like the finale in a fireworks show.
I thought I saw smoke.
Yeah. If the Bible tells you to love your enemies. I've been told that if you think of people as your enemy, that you can't love them. And so you have to not think of people as your enemy. Or you can't evangelize them. If they know that you think they're a sinner, if they know that you think that they're in error in their behavior, and that if they know that you think their behavior is vile, you'll be impossible to win them. But Jesus said, love your enemies. You can't love your enemy if you don't recognize an enemy as an enemy. You have to know your enemy in order to deal with your enemy, in order to love your enemy. So an entire approach that says, they're not my enemy. Oh, they are. But that doesn't mean you can't love them and try and win them. But you need to know what they are. Like the early church was scared to death of Paul. And they had every reason to be scared to death of him. He's been going around the country killing Christians. And now they're finding out that he's claiming Christ. It's a ruse. It's a trick. He's simply coming to kind of kill us. You have to recognize your enemy. That doesn't mean you can't love them. So I have an acquaintance who is a missionary in Muslim bloc countries. She works in a lot of the refugee camps. She said that it's a horror. This story's a horror. That's a horror. And she's like, she says to me, I love the Muslim people. I am working with them, and I will probably be killed by them. But I will die for them. But any country that lets them in is stupid. They are enemies of the world. It is their design to destroy every civilization they enter. And only an idiot country doesn't recognize they are your enemy. She goes, I love my enemy, and I will die for my enemy. But they are my enemy. Very important distinction to make. Now, how did we get there? I don't know. But we're talking about the feeling. So we're becoming more and more a feeling people rather than a thinking people. And it makes it hard to teach people anything. It makes it hard for you to understand Scripture if you can't think about Scripture. You just have to feel it. Oh, that's not the way it happened with us, so I just don't know what to do with that. So you just have to, okay, what are their categories? How did it work? What were the rules? What were the expectations? How does this thing that I'm looking at fit the pattern or break the pattern? If you like what you're hearing today, please subscribe below. And don't forget to share it on as many platforms as you can. And tell your friends to watch. Thank you.